My name is Rachel Alley. I am a 34-year-old cardiothoracic surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital. When I was 9, my mother chose my older brother because he was the smart one. My father chose my little sister because she was the sweet one. Then they looked at me and said I was the one they could throw away. They drove me to a children's home in Akron, sat me on a cold bench, and promised they'd come back by Sunday. They never did. For 25 years they erased me so completely that my own sister believed I was dead. And the moment they needed something from me again, they had no idea that the girl whose body they once treated as disposable had grown into a woman who decides, very precisely, what her body is for. Tell me, where are you listening to this right now? And what time is it where you are? I want to know how far this story has traveled before I tell you what happens next. To understand why I let that phone ring for 30 minutes on the morning of February 2nd, 2026, you have to go back to the morning of October 14th, 2000. The morning a Buick sedan idled in a parking lot in Akron, Ohio, and two people who called themselves my parents decided which of their 3 children they could afford to keep. I opened a chest that Monday morning. Coronary artery bypass graft. Routine. The patient was 62, stable, good veins. I made the incision at 7:03. The OR was cold the way all operating rooms are cold. My hands didn't shake. They haven't shaken in years. I wear a size 7.5 glove. Latex. The index finger on my left hand has a small scar from a kitchen knife at the children's home when I was 11. I was peeling potatoes. No one taught me how. I figured it out. The surgery took 4 hours. When I stripped off my gloves in the scrub room afterward, I saw my phone screen lit up on the shelf above my locker. 7 missed calls. I didn't recognize the number, but my phone did. It auto-populated a name I hadn't seen in 25 years. Patricia Brennan. Mother. Do not pick up. I didn't. I drove home to Beacon Hill. The apartment I share with David Carlson, who is an architect, who met me at an art museum in March of 2022, who has never once asked me to explain where I came from. We made dinner. Salmon? He asked if I was okay. I said the phone rang again. He said I don't owe anyone an answer, just because they finally remembered the question. On the bookshelf in our living room, there's a hardcover copy of a memoir I published 17 months ago. The title is The Hands That Were Left. It sold 520,000 copies. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 8 weeks. I gave all the money to an orphanage in Akron, Ohio. David asked if it was Lily again. I said no. The mother. He put his fork down. There are 3 people in my life who know the whole story. David is one. Dr. Aidan Murphy, a colleague at Mass General, is another. The third is a woman named Joan Pemberton, who is 68 years old, who lives in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, who calls me every Sunday and leaves voicemails that start with the words, "Sweet girl." Joan never gave birth to me. She is the only person I have ever called mother. That night, Joan's voicemail said the dogwood tree in her front yard was budding 3 weeks early. She said she loved me. I've kept that voicemail saved since 2018, the year her husband Walter died. Walter was the man who taught me to suture on an orange when I was 14 years old. He said steady hands aren't a gift. They're a discipline. He said the hand stops shaking when the brain decides the patient matters more than the fear. 8 years later, on his deathbed, he handed me the last spool of catgut thread from his medic kit he carried in Vietnam and said, "These hands are yours now." The phone rang 5 more times that week. On the 5th call, I let the screen stay lit. I counted. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. It rang until the voicemail cut off. 2 minutes later, a different number. Howard Brennan. Dad. The voicemail said, "Rachel, it's Dad. We need to talk. It's about your brother, please." I hadn't saved their numbers. My phone recognized them from some database, which meant they were still using the same phones they'd had in 2000. Patricia was still in Dayton. Howard was still in Cincinnati. They'd been divorced for 25 years. They hadn't lived in the same city since 2001. but they'd both kept their numbers. They just stopped calling. Let me tell you about the day they stopped. It was August of 2000 when they told us. My brother Jacob was 13. My sister Lily was 6. I was 9. We sat at the kitchen table in the house in Dayton where my mother lived after the separation. My father stood next to her. It was the last time I saw them stand next to each other like a unit. My mother said, "Your father and I are not going to live together anymore. But you're still loved." Jacob understood. He was old enough. Lily cried. I asked where I was going to live. No one answered. My mother said, "We'll figure it out, sweetheart. There's a lot to work through, but we'll figure it out." She said that phrase 8 times over the next 2 months. I counted. On the morning of October 14th, 2000, my mother called the 3 of us downstairs. There were 3 backpacks on the kitchen table. Jacob's had a Jurassic Park logo. Mine had the Lion King. Lily's had Hello Kitty. I thought we were going on a trip. Maybe a picnic. Maybe one last family thing before the divorce was final. My mother said, "We're going on a drive today. Each of you, grab your bag. Jacob, you're riding with me. Lily, you're with Dad. Rachel, you're with both of us for now." I opened my backpack in the car. 2 shirts, 1 pair of pants, a copy of Bridge to Terabithia. That was it. Jacob's bag was full. 5 days of clothes, a Game Boy. Lily's had her stuffed animal and pajamas. I asked why I only had 2 shirts. My mother said, "Because this is a short trip, honey." My father drove. My mother sat in the passenger seat. I sat alone in the back. We drove north, past Columbus, past Cleveland. The radio played Breathe by Faith Hill. I will remember that song for the rest of my life. I asked where we were going. My father said, "Just sit tight, kid. Almost there. Your mom and I, we both want what's best for you." We turned down a narrow street in Akron. At the end was a 3-story red brick building with an iron fence and a cross on the roof. I asked if it was a church. No one answered. My mother got out. My father got out. They walked me to a wooden bench outside the front door. My mother sat down next to me. She said, "Rachel, honey, your father and I were going through a hard time. Jacob is going to stay with me. Lily is going to stay with Dad. And you're going to stay here for a little while. Just until we get settled. We'll come back Sunday. I promise." She handed me an envelope. $14. A peanut butter sandwich cut into 4 triangle pieces, wrapped in foil. She set it on the bench next to my leg. My father stood 10 feet away, looking at his shoes. My mother kissed my forehead. Estee Lauder. Pleasures. I can still smell it. She stood up. She walked back to the car. My father followed. They got in. The engine was already running. It had never turned off. I watched them through the back window. My mother glanced at me once in the rearview mirror. Then she turned forward. My father put the car in reverse. No one looked back. The engine never stopped. That was how I knew they weren't coming back even before they left the parking lot. The car pulled away. Dust rose behind the tires. I sat on that bench for 3 hours. My mother had said, "Don't move." I didn't move. At 5 in the afternoon, a woman in a gray habit came outside. She sat down next to me. She said, "Sweetheart, what's your name?" I said, "Rachel Brennan." My mother said she'd come back Sunday. The woman was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Did your mother come inside with you?" I said no, she said. "To wait." The woman closed her eyes for 1 second. Her name was Sister Therese Donovan. She was 54 years old. She was the director of St. Vincent's Children's Home. She already had a file in her office with my name on it. 2 signatures. Patricia Brennan, Howard Brennan, dated October 11th, 2000. 3 days before they dropped me off. They had signed the papers before they put the backpacks on the table. They knew what they were doing. Sister Therese took my hand. She said, "Let's go inside, child. It's getting cold." I said, Sunday is the day after tomorrow, right? She didn't answer. She led me through the door. It closed behind us. There was a small click when the lock engaged. Not a slam, just a click. That was the sound I learned, at 9 years old, of the difference between a door closing and a door locking. Sunday came. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning. I had slept in my clothes because I wanted to be ready. I put on my cleanest shirt, the one my mother had packed. I sat by the second-floor window that faced the driveway. The glass was cold against my forehead. I waited for a navy blue Buick. 7 o'clock. No car. I could see the road clearly now. Every car that turned down the street made my heart speed up. None of them were navy blue. None of them were hers. 9 o'clock. Sister Therese knocked on the door. She said breakfast is downstairs. I said my mom said Sunday. I have to wait here. She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded and left. Noon. The other children were eating lunch. I could hear them downstairs. My stomach hurt. I ate one of the triangle pieces of the peanut butter sandwich my mother had packed. It was stale. The bread had hardened at the edges. I ate it anyway because it was the last thing she'd given me. 3 o'clock. The sandwich was gone. The $14 were still in the envelope in my pocket. I didn't know what to use them for. Sister Therese came back with a glass of water. She set it next to me. She didn't say anything. I said she said Sunday. Sister Therese said, I know, child. I know. 5 in the afternoon. The sun was lower now. The shadows on the driveway were long. No navy blue Buick. Sister Therese came back with a plate of food. Chicken, mashed potatoes. She set it down on the windowsill. She said, you should eat, Rachel. You've been here all day. I said, but what if she comes and I'm not at the window? Sister Therese said, if she comes, we'll hear the car. I promise. I ate the food where I sat. I watched the driveway while I chewed. 9 at night. It was fully dark now. I couldn't see the road anymore. I could only see headlights if a car passed. None of them slowed down. None of them turned. I whispered to myself, maybe she meant next Sunday. Maybe I heard her wrong. Maybe she said the Sunday after this Sunday. That must be it. The next Sunday, I woke up at 5 again. I sat at the window. No car came. The Sunday after that, no car. The Sunday after that, no car. I counted 12 Sundays, then 20, then 50, then 100. At 208 Sundays, I stopped counting. That was when I turned 13, 4 years after the bench. In the 3rd week, I asked Sister Therese for paper and a pen. I wrote a letter to my mother. Dear Mom, I am being good. I am waiting like you said. The people here are nice, but I want to come home. Please come soon. Love, Rachel. I gave it to Sister Therese. She said, I can mail this for you, sweetheart, but I need your mother's address. I told her. Dayton, Ohio. The street name, the house number. I had it memorized. Sister Therese's face changed when I said the address. Just for a second. Then she took the letter. She said, I'll mail it tomorrow. I said, thank you. I wrote one letter every week. The second letter said, Dear Mom, it's been 3 weeks. I am still being good. I made a friend. His name is Tommy. He is 7. I hope you are okay. Please write back. Love, Rachel. The 4th letter said, Dear Mom, did you get my letters? Sister Therese says she mailed them. Maybe they got lost. I am trying very hard to be good. I don't cry. I help with the dishes. Please come. Love, Rachel. The 8th letter said, Dear Mom, it's been 2 months. I miss you. I miss Jacob. I miss Lily. I miss the house. Did you and Dad work things out yet? Can I come home now? Love, Rachel. I wrote 23 letters in the 1st year. Sister Therese mailed every single one to the address in Dayton. My mother never wrote back. Not once. After the 8th letter, Sister Therese asked me if I was sure I wanted her to mail it. I said yes. Why? She said, "Because sometimes, Rachel, people don't write back even when they get the letters." I said, "But you're still mailing them, right?" She said, "Yes, I'm still mailing them." I said, "Then please mail this one too." That night, I heard Sister Therese crying in her office. I didn't know adults could cry like that. Like something inside them was breaking. After the 8th letter, Sister Therese asked me if I wanted her to mail it. I gave her the address. She closed her eyes. She already had that address. She had been sending them. They were going through. My mother was receiving them. She was choosing not to respond. Years later, after Sister Therese died in 2017, Joan Pemberton helped sort through her things. In a wooden box in the file room, there were 23 photocopies, one for each letter I had written. Sister Therese had kept a record. She knew even then that one day I might need proof. There were 11 children at St. Vincent's that first winter. Some had parents in prison. Some had been removed from homes for neglect. Some had parents who were too poor to keep them. I was the only one whose parents had simply chosen not to. It wasn't an emergency. It wasn't poverty. It wasn't drugs or jail or death. It was preference. A boy named Tommy Riley, 7 years old, asked me once when my mom was coming back. I said Sunday. She said Sunday. He said it's been 4 months. I said, I know. On Christmas Eve, 2006 children were picked up by family members. 5 of us stayed. I was one of the 5. There was turkey, mashed potatoes. Sister Therese put up a small tree in our dorm room. She decorated it with peppermint candies. Another girl, Sarah Whitlock, 8 years old, started crying at the table. I asked why. She said, because my mom forgot. I said, your mom didn't forget. She chose. It's different. That was the first time I named it correctly. Choice. Not forgetfulness. That was the moment I stopped being a child. That night, Sister Therese put a peppermint candy on my pillow. The wrapper had a note. It said, "You are still loved." Signed, Sister T. I kept that piece of paper for 26 years. It's in my desk drawer at Mass General right now. By March of 2004, I had been at St. Vincent's for 3.5 years. I was 12, almost 13. Sister Therese had sent my file to 17 foster families. This is what it said at the top of the file. Rachel Brennan, age 12, no behavioral issues, good student, quiet, independent. At the bottom, it said parents voluntarily relinquished custody, no reunification plan. The first 12 families rejected me before ever meeting me. Too old, they all said. They wanted babies. They wanted toddlers. They wanted children young enough that they wouldn't remember being somewhere else first. Sister Therese read me the responses sometimes. We're looking for a child under 5. We feel called to adopt an infant. We've decided to wait for a younger placement. Every single one said younger. The 13th family was the Millers. They agreed to meet me. They drove 3 hours from Pennsylvania. Mrs. Miller smiled a lot. Mr. Miller asked me questions. What's your favorite subject? Do you like sports? What do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I like science. I don't play sports. I don't know what I want to be yet. They thanked Sister Therese and left. A week later, Sister Therese got a call. The Millers said I was too quiet. They wanted a child who smiled more. The 14th family was the Johnsons. Mrs. Johnson brought her daughter, who was 10. The daughter talked the whole time about her room and her toys and how excited she was to have a sister. Mrs. Johnson kept looking at me like she was waiting for something. After an hour, she said to Sister Therese, "Can we have a moment alone?" They went into the hallway. I heard Mrs. Johnson say through the door, "She just doesn't engage, you know? She doesn't seem excited. We're looking for a child who wants to be part of a family." A week later, they called. They'd decided on a younger child. A 6-year-old girl who, Mrs. Johnson said, lit up the room. The 15th and 16th families were similar. One said I didn't smile enough. One said they wanted someone younger after all. Sister Therese stopped telling me when families were coming to meet me. She said it might be easier if I didn't get my hopes up. The 17th family was the Caldwells. They took me home. November of 2003. I remember the date because it was 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. They had a nice house, a room ready for me. Mrs. Caldwell made spaghetti the first night. She asked me if I liked it. I said yes, it's very good. Mr. Caldwell asked me about school. I told him about the books I was reading. Everything seemed okay. I stayed for 6 weeks. I didn't do anything wrong. I kept my room clean. I did my homework. I said please and thank you. I tried to smile when Mrs. Caldwell talked to me, but I could feel something was off. They'd look at each other across the table. Mrs. Caldwell would start a sentence and then stop. Mr. Caldwell would clear his throat and change the subject. On December 30th, Mrs. Caldwell sat me down. She said, "Rachel, honey, we think it's best if you go back to St. Vincent's." I said, "Did I do something wrong?" She said, No, it's not that. It's just not the right fit, that's all. Sometimes things just don't fit." I said, "Okay." What else was I supposed to say? Sister Therese picked me up that afternoon. In the car, she said, "I'm sorry, Rachel. I didn't say anything. I didn't speak for 2 weeks after that. Every time someone asked me a question, I just looked at them." Sister Therese wrote in her file, "Child returned December 30th, 2003. No abuse noted. Family cited poor fit. Rachel nonverbal for 14 days. In March of 2004, Sister Therese got a call from Pennsylvania. A couple named Walter and Joan Pemberton. They had been fostering for 18 years. They read my file. The first thing Walter said was, "We've been doing this a long time, sister. We know what 13 looks like, and we know what a kid who's been returned looks like. Send her to us. We'll come get her." Sister Therese told me later that she cried after she hung up the phone. It was the first time in 3.5 years she let herself believe I might leave. On September 4th, 2004, Walter and Joan Pemberton drove 6 hours from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania to Akron, Ohio. Walter was 53, gray hair, blue flannel shirt. Joan was 46, small frame, easy smile. They didn't hug me when we met. Joan sat down next to me and said, "You don't have to like us today. We don't expect that." Walter said there's a room upstairs with a window facing east. Sun comes in around 7. You can keep it locked from the inside if you want. We won't knock unless you ask. Then he handed me a key. Before we even got in the car. It was the first time in my life someone had given me the right to lock my own door. The drive back to Pennsylvania took 6 hours. 370 miles. Joan didn't ask me about Akron. She just talked about the house, about their dog, Biscuit, about a librarian named Mrs. Ali who worked at the Bethlehem Public Library. I fell asleep in the car. It was the first time I'd slept in a moving vehicle in 4 years. The house was white. 2 stories. My room had a dogwood tree outside the window. Joan had made the bed with light blue sheets. There was a blank notebook on the desk. A pen. She said, "I don't know what you write or if you do, but sometimes things come out easier on paper than out loud. It's yours either way." That night I wrote in the notebook, "They have a dog. The dog's name is Biscuit. Biscuit slept on my feet tonight. I did not move." I still have that notebook. For the first 6 months, I was afraid of every sound. Footsteps in the hallway meant someone was coming. Doors closing meant someone was angry. Voices raised meant something bad was about to happen. But the Pemberton house was quiet. No yelling, no doors slamming. Walter cooked dinner every Wednesday. Spaghetti, always the same recipe. Joan made chocolate chip cookies every Sunday. The same time, 3 o'clock. It was a structure. It was predictable. Predictable felt safe, 3 months in, Walter said something to me while we were washing dishes. He said, "You don't have to talk about Akron, but if you ever do, Joan and I, we'll listen the whole way. We won't fix it. We'll just listen." I didn't say anything, but that night I wrote in my notebook, "Walter said I don't have to talk about it." I have never met an adult who said I don't have to do something. Usually adults tell me what I have to do. Walter had been a medic in Vietnam. He'd served from 1969 to 1971. He told me once that he'd kept a 19-year-old soldier alive for 4 hours under fire in Hue. The kid had shrapnel in his abdomen. Walter held pressure on the wound while bullets hit the wall behind them. The kid lived. Walter said he'd never forgotten the weight of that. Keeping someone breathing when everything around you is telling you they should be dead. He said, "Sometimes silence is how you keep a person breathing. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just sit there and not let them be alone." In my 7th month there, I asked him a question. We were in the kitchen. He was slicing tomatoes for a salad. I said, "Can you teach me how to do that? Keep someone alive?" Walter stopped. He put the knife down. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said yes. "But first I'm going to teach you something else. How to make something that's broken close back up." The next day he brought home an orange, a curved needle, a spool of catgut thread. He set them on the kitchen table. He said, "This is how you suture a wound." He showed me how to hold the needle, how to angle it, how to push through the skin of the orange in one smooth motion, how to tie a knot that won't slip, how to space the stitches evenly. I practiced for 3 months, 200 times on that orange, then another orange, then another. My hands shook the first week. Walter said, "That's normal. Your brain is afraid you're going to hurt something. You have to teach your brain that you're trying to fix something instead." By the end of the first month, my hands were steady. Walter kept a notebook. Day 1, trembling. Day 15, improving. Day 30 even. Day 60, surgical. He showed me the notebook at the end. He said, "You have a gift for this." I said, "You said it's not a gift. It's a discipline." He smiled. He said, "You were paying attention." After 3 months, he gave me a book. Surgical Anatomy by Frank Netter. Inside the cover he'd written, "For the hands I trust. WP." I still have that book. It's on my shelf at home. The spine is cracked. The pages are dog-eared. I've read it cover to cover 17 times. Walter never asked me why I wanted to learn. He never said you're too young or this is too serious or shouldn't you be thinking about normal kid things. He just taught me. And while he taught me, he'd tell me stories. About the kid in Hue, about the other soldiers he'd saved, about the ones he couldn't save. He said, "You can't save everyone. The trick is knowing that going in. You do your best. You make your hands steady. You tie the knots tight. And then you let go of the outcome because the outcome was never yours to control." I asked him once why he and Joan became foster parents. He said, "Because we couldn't have kids of our own. And because I spent 2 years in Vietnam watching kids die. When I came home, I thought the least I could do is make sure some kids get a chance to grow up. You're the 9th kid we've taken in. Some stayed a few months. Some stayed years. All of them still call. All of them know they can come back any time. That's the deal. This door doesn't lock from the outside." I asked him if he ever regretted it, taking in kids who weren't his. He said no, not once. These kids, they're not ours, but we're theirs if they want us. That's enough. In April of 2010, I turned 18. I was about to start at Penn State on a full scholarship. I wanted to change my last name. Brennan felt like a scar that wouldn't heal. At the Bethlehem Public Library, there was a woman named Mrs. Ali. She was Jordanian American. She had helped me with my college applications for 4 years. I asked her if I could take her name. She said, "Child, names are gifts. If you take mine, take it because it makes you stronger. Not because you're running from another. I said it will make me stronger." Joan and Walter went with me to the courthouse. Walter signed as a witness. Joan cried. It was the only time I ever saw her cry. That night, Walter poured me a glass of orange juice. I don't drink alcohol. He raised his glass. To Rachel Alley. The hands she earned and the name she chose. 8 years later, Walter died of stage 4 lung cancer. I was in my second year of surgical residency at Johns Hopkins. I flew home to Pennsylvania. At his bedside, he opened his old medic kit, the one he'd carried in Vietnam. He took out the last spool of catgut thread. He said, "Rachel, these hands are yours now. Don't waste them on people who never deserved you. But, and this matters, don't refuse them to people who need them. The trick is knowing the difference." He died 3 days later. I went to college. Penn State, 2009 to 2013. Biology major, English minor. My honors thesis was on sutured wound healing in pediatric trauma. I called Walter every Sunday. He read my thesis like it was scripture. He said, page 17, paragraph 2, that sentence about granulation tissue. That's the most beautiful sentence I've read this year. Are you sure you want to be a doctor? You write like a writer. I said doctors who write don't lose what they see. That line became the tagline for my memoir 14 years later. I got into Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. 4 years. In my 3rd year, I rotated through cardiothoracic surgery. That was the first time I saw a beating heart in an open chest. I knew I wouldn't do anything else. The attending that day said, "You don't flinch, Allie. That's rare in 3rd years. Most people remember their hands when they see a heart for the first time. You forgot yours." I matched into general surgery residency at Johns Hopkins. 5 years, 2017 to 2022. Then cardiothoracic fellowship at Mass General, 2022 to 2024. My mentor was Dr. Catherine Whitman. She was 67 when I started, freshly retired from being the first female chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Mass General. She still took 1 fellow a year. She called me kid. On my first day, she said, "I read your application. I read the part about Akron. I'm not going to ask about it. I'm going to teach you how to operate. If at some point you want to talk about the rest, my door is open. If you don't, my door is still open." That's what mentorship looks like, kid. In March of 2022, I went to an art exhibit at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. A man stood in front of a replica of Girl with a Pearl Earring for 20 minutes. I said, "You know it's a copy, right?" He said, "Originals are overrated." The copy chose to be here. That's interesting, too. His name was David Carlson. He's an architect. We started dating. 6 months later, he said, "Whatever happened to you before me, that's yours. You don't owe me a tour." In June of 2023, Catherine Whitman introduced me to an editor at HarperCollins. Her name was Charlotte Reeves. Over dinner, I told them the story of the bench in Akron. Charlotte asked if I'd ever thought about writing a book. 4 days later, I sent an email. I said, "I'll do it. But I write it alone. The title will be The Hands That Were Left. I'll need 8 months." The contract was $1.2 million. I transferred the entire advance into a trust fund for St. Vincent's Children's Home, a scholarship fund for kids aging out of the system who wanted to go to college. I named it the Therese Donovan Scholarship. The book came out on September 17th, 2024. Week 1, 18,000 copies. Week 3, number 7 on the New York Times list. Week 4, number 3. By the end of the year, 520,000 copies. I didn't name my parents in the book. I wrote my mother, my father, my brother, my sister. That was a legal decision, but I wrote enough detail that anyone who knew the Brennan family in Dayton, Ohio in 2000 could recognize them. In November of 2024, I gave a TED Talk. The title was "The Body Belongs to Whoever Earned It." It's been viewed 12.8 million times. The closing line was, "My hands belong to me first. After that, they belong to whoever I choose. Not whoever chose me, In the comments section, one comment got 84,000 upvotes. It said, "My older brother says we have a sister we don't talk about. He won't tell me her name. After watching this, I'm going to find her." The username was LB Hayes. LB stood for Lily Brennan. Hayes was her married name. In October of 2024, a 30-year-old woman walked into a Barnes & Noble in Cincinnati, Ohio. She was 6 months pregnant. She picked up a copy of The Hands That Were Left. She opened to page 17. It described a yellow Lion King backpack, a peanut butter sandwich cut into 4 triangles, a navy blue Buick. The line that stopped her was this: "My mother chose my older brother because he was the smart one. My father chose my little sister because she was the sweet one. Then they looked at me and said I was the one they could throw away." Lily called her father. She said, "Dad, Rachel had a Lion King backpack, didn't she? Dad, please, tell me the truth." Howard was silent for 12 seconds. Then he said, "Lily, where are you right now?" Lily drove to her father's house in Cincinnati. She put the book on the kitchen table. She said, "Dad, I need you to tell me what happened in 2000. And I need you to tell me where Mom's house is, because I'm going there tonight." Howard gave her the address. Dayton, 50 miles north. The house where Patricia still lived. The house where Jacob had grown up. Lily hadn't been there since she was 6 years old. Lily arrived at 10 at night. She knocked. Patricia opened the door. She looked shocked to see her daughter. Lily said one sentence: "I need to see the attic." Patricia didn't stop her. She led Lily upstairs, opened the door to the room under the eaves. Lily turned on the light. In the corner, under a stack of old boxes, were 3 backpacks: Jurassic Park, Lion King, Hello Kitty. Patricia had kept all 3 for 24 years. Lily opened the Lion King backpack. Inside was a copy of Bridge to Terabithia, 2 small shirts, a pair of jeans. Nothing else. Patricia had kept it exactly as it was on October 14th, 2000. Lily sat down on the floor with the backpack in her lap. She started crying in a way she'd never cried before. She said, "Where is she? Where's Rachel?" Patricia said, "I don't know. We lost contact after." Lily held up the memoir. She said her name is Rachel Ali now. She's a surgeon in Boston. And she wrote a book. And I'm going to find her. In November of 2024, I received a letter at Mass General. 7 pages. Handwritten. The return address was Cincinnati. It said, "Rachel, I don't know how to start this letter because I have spent 24 years believing I was an only child after age 6. I am not asking for anything. I just need you to know that I did not know." The letter said, "Mom and Dad told me you died in October 2000. They said there was a car accident. They said we don't talk about it because the grief broke our family in half. I named my daughter after you, Rebecca Rose. I called her Ray. She was born 3 months ago. I am not writing because I want a relationship. I have no right to ask. I am writing because you deserve to know that one of us was lied to as much as you were." The last line said, "If you never write back, I will understand. I will continue to light a candle on October 14th. I just won't lie to my daughter about why." I read the letter 3 times. I put it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond for 10 months. In September of 2025, Lily Brennan Hayes got in her car at 6 in the morning. She told her husband Tyler she was going to a teaching conference. She drove east. 640 miles, 11 hours. Cincinnati to Boston. She stopped once for gas in Albany, New York. She parked across the street from Massachusetts General Hospital. She didn't go inside. She sat in a Starbucks on Cambridge Street for 3 hours. She looked at the directory board outside the main entrance. One line read, "Rachel Ali, MD, Cardiothoracic Surgery, Floor 3. She took a picture of it. Then she got back in her car and drove 11 hours home. Tyler asked how the conference was. She said it was good. I learned a lot. She didn't lie. She had learned that her sister was real, that the building was real, that there was a name on a wall 200 feet away from where she'd been standing. In October of 2025, I received a second letter from Lily. 2 pages. There was a photo. A baby girl, 8 months old. The letter said, "I'm not asking. I just thought you should see her face once. She has your eyes. I didn't know that until I saw your TED Talk." Signed, Lily. I told David about it that night. I said she named her daughter Rebecca Rose. My grandmother's name was Rebecca Rose Brennan. Lily didn't know, because no one told her. She just chose a name with an R. David said, "You're going to write back, aren't you?" I said, "Not yet." In December of 2025, I mailed Lily a DNA test kit. No letter, no note, just the kit and a return label addressed to Mass General. I included a slip of paper with my phone number and one sentence. "If you want proof, here it is. Signed, R.A." 2 days later, I got a text. "Done. Thank you for letting me prove it. Signed, L." On January 3rd, 2026, the results came back. 49.8% shared DNA. Full siblings. I was sitting in my office at 9 at night when I opened the email. I sat on the floor and cried for the first time since Walter died 7 years earlier. David found me there. He didn't say anything. He just sat next to me. A week later, Patricia found an envelope on Lily's kitchen table. The return address said Rachel Ali, MD, Massachusetts General Hospital. Patricia asked Lily if she'd been in contact with me. Lily said yes. For months. "I didn't tell you because you lied to me for 24 years. Patricia said, "Lily, you don't understand. When that happened, Lily said, "No. You can't explain this. I want you to leave." Patricia didn't leave right away. She asked, "Does she know about Jacob?" Lily said, "You mean the brother who always knew Rachel was alive and never said anything?" "Yes. I told her about him. She hasn't responded." Patricia was silent for 10 seconds. Then she said, "Jacob's kidneys are failing. He's been on dialysis for over a year. We need to talk to her." That night, Lily texted me, "Rachel, you need to know. Mom found out we're in contact. Jacob's kidneys are failing. I think they're going to come to you. Not for me. For him." On February 2nd, 2026, at 7:14 in the morning, my phone rang while I was scrubbing out of surgery. Patricia Brennan. I let it ring. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes. It stopped. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Howard Brennan. Over the next 9 days, I received 17 voicemails. Patricia, Howard, Jacob, not Lily. Lily stayed silent. The tone escalated. Worry, pleading, guilt, legal threat. Day 4, Patricia said. "Rachel, please. Your father can't sleep. We were young. We made a decision. We thought it was best. Jacob is so sick now. He has a wife, Megan. She's lovely. You'd like her. Please call us back. We're family." Day 7, Howard said, "Rachel, I'm not going to apologize for what I can't take back, but your brother needs help. As his sibling, you have a moral duty." Day 9, Patricia said, "Rachel, if you don't call back by Friday, Howard and I are flying to Boston. We've spoken with a lawyer." I forwarded all 17 voicemails to my attorney. Her name is Annette Whitfield. She works at a firm called Klein Whitfield & Crow. She listened to all of them. Then she called me and said, "Honey, they've already lawyered up. We need to lawyer up first." On February 11th, Annette sent a cease and desist letter. No contact with Rachel Ali except through counsel. 2 days later, their attorney, a man named Brendan Hollis, responded. "Our clients are seeking a private meeting on humanitarian grounds related to a medical matter affecting Mr. Jacob Brennan. Annette told me I didn't have to meet them. She said there is no legal duty to donate an organ to a sibling. None. Zero. The only question is whether you want closure on your terms." I thought about it for 4 nights. On the 4th night, I called Catherine Whitman at 11. She said, "Kid, the question isn't whether you owe them. The question is what you owe yourself." On February 11th, Patricia flew from Dayton to Boston, Delta. Howard flew from Cincinnati to Boston, Southwest. 2 separate flights. Same day. They met in the lobby of the Hyatt Boston Harbor at 2 in the afternoon. It was the first time they'd stood in the same room in 25 years. On February 13th, Jacob and his wife Megan flew in. Jacob had a dialysis appointment at Brigham and Women's Hospital scheduled for the 14th. He'd been on dialysis for 14 months. Stage 5 end-stage renal disease. The wait for a deceased donor was 3 to 6 years. He wouldn't make it. Patricia texted me, "We're here, please." Howard sent a separate text. "Your mother and I haven't been in the same room since your sister graduated high school. We're here together now. That should tell you how serious this is." Then Jacob left a voicemail. His voice. I hadn't heard it in 25 years. He said, "Rachel, it's Jacob. I'm not going to pretend I deserve this call. Megan's pregnant. We're trying to make it work. The dialysis is killing me. Please." 10 minutes later, Lily texted me, "Rachel, Megan miscarried in October 2025. I was at the hospital with her. Jacob is lying." I forwarded Jacob's voicemail to Annette. She said they're desperate. Desperate people lie. That's not a reason to say yes. That's a reason to be very, very careful. On March 3rd, I met Catherine Whitman for a walk along the Charles River. She said, "Kid, you are about to face 4 people who, between them, owe you 25 years of explanations. They will not give you those explanations. They will give you a kidney request. You need to know what you want from this room before you walk in." She said, "Don't go in to convince them of anything. They are not capable. Go in to deliver the truth and leave." I said I want them to understand that the door that locked in 2000 has never reopened. Catherine said, "Then say that. And only that." The meeting was scheduled for March 4th, 2026, at 2 in the afternoon. I chose the location. Shapiro Building, 2nd floor, Conference Room 204A, Administrative Building at Mass General. Not the surgical floor. Not outside the hospital. On my ground. When Patricia walked into the lobby that day, she saw the directory board on the wall. One line read, "Rachel Ali, MD, Cardiothoracic Surgery, Wang Ambulatory Care Center, Floor 3. It was the first time she had seen her daughter's name printed on a building. At 2 o'clock, I walked into the conference room. Annette Whitfield sat to my left. Across the table, Howard Brennan, Patricia Brennan. They sat 2 chairs apart. Even after flying to the same city for the first time in 25 years, they couldn't sit next to each other. Jacob Brennan sat next to his wife, Megan. Their attorney, Brendan Hollis, sat at the end. He had a stack of papers in front of him. Medical records, I assumed. Lab results. Transplant compatibility reports. I sat down. I put my folder on the table. I said, "You have 30 minutes. I am not your daughter or your sister. I am the surgeon you came to ask. Begin." Patricia started. Her voice shook. She said, "Rachel." She stopped. She looked at Howard. He didn't look back. She tried again. She said, "Rachel, Howard and I, we know this is hard. We know we haven't. We haven't been in touch. We made decisions 25 years ago that we thought, at the time, we thought were best for everyone. We were young. We didn't have money. The divorce it was hard on all of us." I didn't say anything. I looked at her. She looked down at her hands. She said, "Jacob is very sick. He's been on dialysis for over a year. The doctors say he needs a transplant. Soon. And we thought you should know. Because you're family." I said family. Patricia said yes. "You're his sister." I said I was his sister on October 14th, 2000. "Where were you when I needed a family?" Patricia's face went pale. Howard shifted in his chair. Jacob leaned forward. He said, "Rachel, I know you have every right to be angry. But I'm asking you, not as your brother, but as someone who needs help. I have stage 5 ESRD, end-stage renal disease. I've been on dialysis 14 months, 3 times a week, 4 hours a session. The waiting list for a deceased donor is 3 to 6 years. My doctor says I have maybe 2 years left at this rate. You're a 99% statistical match as a full sibling. I'm asking you, as a person who has the ability to save a life, to consider it. He'd rehearsed that. I could tell. The medical terminology, the statistics, the appeal to my identity as a surgeon. Someone had coached him. I said, "Jacob, what color was my backpack?" He blinked. He said, "What?" I said, "On October 14th, 2000. When you watched me from the back seat of the car. When Mom and Dad drove me to Akron and left me on a bench. What color was my backpack?" Silence. 20 seconds of silence. You could hear the ventilation system humming. I said, "You don't remember. You were 13 years old. Old enough to remember. Old enough to understand what was happening. But you don't remember the color of my backpack. Do you remember what I was wearing? Do you remember if I cried? Do you remember anything about that day except that you got to stay in the car?" Jacob said I was a kid. I didn't understand. I said, "You were 13. You understood." He didn't respond. I opened the folder in front of me. I took out the first stack of papers. Photocopies. 23 pages. I said, "These are the letters I wrote to Patricia in the first year at St. Vincent's. 23 letters. Sister Therese Donovan, the woman who ran the orphanage, mailed every single one. Not once did Patricia write back. Not once did any of you come to visit. Not once did any of you call. I was 9 years old. I waited 208 Sundays before I stopped counting. That's 4 years. 4 years of Sundays. Do you know what that does to a child?" Patricia put her head in her hands. Howard stared at the table. I took out the second item, a photograph. I slid it across the table. I said, "This is the Christmas photo you sent to relatives in 2001. Patricia and Howard and Jacob and Lily. 4 people. I'm not in it. You erased me so completely that my own sister, who was 6 years old, believed I was dead. You told her I died in a car accident. She lit candles for me for 24 years. She named her daughter after me. She grieved for a sister who was alive 300 miles away." Megan, Jacob's wife, started crying. Quietly. She stood up and walked out of the room. I said the third item. I took out the scholarship endowment contract. I said, "This is the Therese Donovan Scholarship Fund. $1.2 million. The entire advance from my memoir. The memoir you hoped I would never write. The memoir that told the truth about what you did. I gave it to St. Vincent's, for kids who age out of the system and want to go to college. Kids like I was. Kids whose families chose not to keep them." I looked at Jacob. I said, "I will not give you a kidney." Jacob said, "Rachel, please." I said, "There are 2 reasons. The first is medical. In order to be a directed living donor, I have to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation is required to ensure that the donor is not being coerced, that the donor fully understands the risks, that the donor is making the decision freely. I decline that evaluation. I will not sit in a room and pretend that this decision is free of coercion when you are sitting here, in my hospital, asking me to cut a piece of myself out to pay a debt I don't owe. I will self-disqualify from the donor pool. The second reason is moral. You sold me once. I will not pay you back in organs." The room went silent. Brendan Hollis, the lawyer, started to say something. Annette held up her hand. She said, "We're done here." Howard stood up. He walked around the table. He dropped to his knees in front of me. He said, "Rachel, please. He's my son. You're my daughter. I'm begging you." I stood up. I looked down at him. I said, "Howard, stand up." He didn't move. I said, "I am not your daughter. I stopped being your daughter the day you left the car engine running. That child died on the bench in Akron. The child who waited for you. The child who wrote 23 letters. The child who thought maybe if she was good enough, quiet enough, easy enough, you'd come back. That child is dead. I am the woman who lived in her place. And the woman who lived in her place does not kneel to anyone. And she does not give her body to people who treated it as disposable. Howard's face crumpled. Patricia was sobbing. Jacob sat frozen in his chair. I picked up my folder. I said, "You have my answer." I walked to the door. I turned back. I said one more thing. This is the first time you and Patricia have been in the same room in 25 years. You hate each other so much you couldn't even sit next to each other at this table. But you flew to the same city. You sat in the same room. You coordinated your stories. All for Jacob. Not for me. For him. That tells me everything I need to know about what I was worth to you then. And what I'm worth to you now. I walked out. Annette stayed behind. David was waiting for me by the car on Charles Street. It was raining lightly. I got in. I didn't cry. I said done. 2 days later, Jacob sent an email. No lawyer. Just him. It said, "Rachel, I'm not going to ask again. I understand. For what it's worth, when you sat on that bench in Akron, I knew. I was 13. I let it happen. I have been 13 in my head for 25 years. I don't expect this to mean anything to you." Jacob. I replied with one line. It means something. It does not change anything. That was the last time Jacob and I communicated. On March 8th, I drove to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. 6 hours. 220 miles. Joan was in the kitchen making chocolate chip cookies. I told her everything. When I finished, she said, "Sweet girl." Walter would be very proud of those hands today. He would also be very proud that you knew when not to use them. She gave me Walter's old medic kit. Inside was a letter he'd written in 2018. The envelope said, "For the day she has to choose." I read it in the car on the way home. It said, "Rachel, there are 2 ways to honor what someone gave you. Use it, or refuse to misuse it. Both count. Love you, kid." Pew. On March 10th, I called Lily for the first time. Not a text, not an email, a phone call. We talked for 52 minutes. She told me about the night she found the backpacks, about the 24 years of candles, about her daughter, who she'd named Rebecca Rose, nickname Ray, after a sister she thought had died. I said, "I'm coming to Cincinnati next week. I'm bringing Joan. I want you to meet my real mother." It was the first time I'd called Joan that in front of someone else. Lily was quiet for 8 seconds. Then she said, "Rebecca's nickname is Ray. After you, Rachel and Rebecca and Ray. I don't know why I'm telling you this now. I'm sorry." I said, "Don't be sorry, Lily. I'm coming." On March 14th, 2026, I flew JetBlue Flight 1102 from Boston to Cincinnati. Joan came with me. We left at 6 in the morning. The flight was 2 hours. Joan held my hand during takeoff. She said, "You ready for this, sweet girl?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "That's okay. You don't have to know. You just have to show up." Tyler Hayes, Lily's husband, picked us up at the airport. He was 33. Quiet. Kind face. He shook my hand and said, "It's good to meet you, Rachel. Lily talks about you every day." I didn't know what to say to that. I said, "It's good to meet you too." The drive to their house in Mount Lookout took 20 minutes. Joan sat in the back seat with me. She pointed out the window at the trees. She said, "Look at those dogwoods, Rachel. Same as the one in your room in Bethlehem." I looked. They were just starting to bloom. Pink petals. Same as the tree I'd looked at every morning for 5 years. Tyler pulled into the driveway of a small white house. There was a swing set in the front yard, a sandbox, children's toys scattered on the porch. He said, "We're here." I got out of the car. My legs felt shaky. Joan came around and stood next to me. She put her hand on my shoulder. She said, "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." The front door opened. Lily stood there holding a baby. Rebecca Rose, 13 months old. Lily looked older than she did in the photos she'd sent. Tired. But her face when she saw me. I don't have words for what her face looked like. She started crying immediately. Not loud. Just tears running down her face. She walked down the porch steps. She stopped 3 feet away from me. She said hi. I said hi. She said, "I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say except hi." I said, "Hi's good." Joan stepped forward. She said, "I'm Joan Pemberton. I'm Rachel's mother." Lily looked at her. She said, "It's good to meet you, Mrs. Pemberton." Joan said, "Call me Joan, honey, and come here." Joan pulled Lily into a hug. Lily was still holding Rebecca. The baby made a sound, a happy gurgle. Joan pulled back and looked at the baby. She said, "And who is this beautiful girl?" Lily said, "This is Rebecca Rose. We call her Ray." She looked at me. She said, "I named her after you, after my sister. I thought you were dead. I thought this was the only way I could keep you with me." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat was closed. Lily held out Rebecca. She said, "Do you want to hold her?" I nodded. Lily put the baby in my arms. Rebecca looked up at me. She had dark eyes. My eyes. The same shape. The same color. Joan had brought a photo from her album. A picture of me at 13 months old. She'd shown it to me on the plane. Rebecca looked exactly like that photo. Rebecca grabbed my index finger. The one with the scar from the potato knife at St. Vincent's. Her grip was strong. She smiled. I said, "Hi, Ray. I'm your Aunt Rachel." Rebecca made a cooing sound and held on tighter. We went inside. The house smelled like coffee and sugar cookies. Lily said I made cookies. Joan's recipe. I found it online. I hope they're okay. Joan said, "I'm sure they're wonderful, honey." We sat in the living room. Lily poured coffee. Tyler brought out the cookies on a plate. He said, "I'm going to give you ladies some space. I'll be in the garage if you need anything." Lily said, "Thank you." He kissed the top of her head and left. Lily sat down across from me. Rebecca was still in my arms. Lily said, "I don't know where to start." I said, "Tell me about the candles." She looked surprised. She said, "You know about the candles?" I said I read about them in your first letter. You said you lit a candle every October 14th. Lily nodded. She said, "Every year. For 24 years. At St. Michael's Church in Cincinnati. The same church where Dad took me growing up. I'd light a candle, and I'd say a prayer. I'd tell you, I'd tell the you I thought was in heaven, about my year, about school, about Tyler, about the baby. I'd say I wish you were here. I'd say I miss you. I'd say I'm sorry I don't remember you better." I was only 6. She stopped. She wiped her eyes. She said, "When I found your memoir, when I read it, when I realized you were alive." I went back to that church. I stood in front of all those candles I'd lit. 24 candles. One for each year. And I wanted to scream. Because you weren't dead. You were 300 miles away. You were alive, and I'd been talking to a ghost. I said you weren't talking to a ghost. You were talking to the version of me that died on that bench. The 9-year-old who waited. She's gone. But you kept her memory. That matters. Lily said, "Does it? Does it matter if it was all based on a lie?" Joan spoke up. She said, "Honey, you were 6 years old. You were lied to. That's not your fault. The fact that you remembered her at all, that you honored her, that you named your daughter after her, that tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are. You're not responsible for what your parents did. Neither of you are." Lily looked at Joan. She said, How did you end up with Rachel?" Joan told her. About St. Vincent's. About the 17 families who said no. About Walter driving 6 hours to pick me up. About teaching me to suture on an orange. About the day I changed my name. About Walter's death. About every Sunday phone call for the past 18 years. Lily listened without interrupting. When Joan finished, Lily said thank you for being what they weren't. We talked for 3 hours. Lily told me about growing up with Howard, about how he'd never remarried, about how he'd worked 2 jobs to keep the house, about how he never talked about the divorce, never mentioned Patricia, never mentioned Rachel, just said your sister died and we don't talk about it because it hurts. Lily said, I thought it hurt because he missed you. I didn't know it hurt because of what he'd done. I told her about the orphanage, about Sister Therese, about the letters, about Christmas Eve 2000 when I realized my mother had chosen not to come, about the Caldwell family returning me after 6 weeks, about Penn State and Johns Hopkins, and learning to be a surgeon, about David, about the memoir, about the day I got her first letter. Lily said, Why didn't you write back? I said, Because I didn't know if I could trust it. I didn't know if you were looking for me or if you were looking for something from me. Like they were. Lily said I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted to know if you were real. I said I know that now. At 2:30 in the afternoon, my phone rang. I was still holding Rebecca. She'd fallen asleep in my arms. The phone was on the coffee table. The screen lit up. Patricia Brennan. Lily and Joan both looked at it. Lily said you don't have to answer. I said I know. 5 minutes. The phone kept ringing. Rebecca stirred but didn't wake up. Joan reached over and put her hand on my shoulder. 10 minutes. Still ringing. Lily said, Does it always ring this long? I said she's calling from a landline. No voicemail cutoff. 20 minutes. I looked down at Rebecca. At her tiny hand still holding my finger. At her face. Peaceful. Trusting. I thought about the bench in Akron. About sitting there for 3 hours because my mother said don't move. About waiting 208 Sundays. About writing 23 letters that were never answered. 30 minutes. The phone finally stopped. 2 minutes later, it started again. Same number. I picked up the phone. Lily said, Rachel. I held up one finger. I pressed one button. Block this caller. Confirm. I set the phone. Face down on the table. Joan said good. Lily said good. Rebecca woke up and looked at me and smiled. I said I need to tell you both something. The door that locked in 2000 is never going to reopen. Not for Patricia. Not for Howard. Not for Jacob. I'm not interested in reconciliation. I'm not interested in explanations. I'm not interested in apologies that come 25 years too late and only because they need something. But Lily, you're different. You were 6 years old. You were lied to. You didn't choose this. So if you want to be in my life, there's space for that. You and Tyler and Rebecca. There's space for that. Lily started crying again. She said yes. I want that. I want that so much. I said okay, then that's what we'll do. We'll start small. We'll take it slow. We'll figure it out as we go. But you're welcome. You and your family. You're welcome. Lily said thank you. She said, Can I hug you? I said yes. She stood up. I handed Rebecca to Joan. Joan took her and held her close, whispering, sweet girl to the baby. Lily and I stood in her living room in Cincinnati and hugged for the first time in 25 years. She said, I'm so sorry. I said, I know. It's not your fault. She said I should have looked sooner. I said you looked when you could. That's enough. That night, Joan and I stayed at a hotel near the airport. Joan fell asleep early. I sat by the window with the notebook she'd given me when I was 13. I wrote one line. Then I closed it. My name is Rachel Ali. I am 34 years old. When I was 9, my mother chose my brother because he was the smart one. My father chose my sister because she was the sweet one, and they looked at me and decided I was the one they could throw away. They drove me to a children's home in Akron, sat me on a cold bench, and promised they'd come back by Sunday. They never did. For 25 years they erased me so completely that my own sister, my little sister who was 6 years old when they took her to live with our father while our mother took our brother to live separately, believed I was dead. She lit candles for me every October 14th for 24 years. She named her daughter after me, and she had no idea I was alive until she walked into a bookstore in Cincinnati and picked up a memoir I wrote about the little girl whose body they once treated as disposable. And the moment they needed something from me again, the moment my brother's kidneys began to fail and a cardiothoracic surgeon with steady hands looked like a solution, they had no idea that the girl whose body they once treated as disposable had grown into a woman who decides very precisely what her body is for. Today, my hands belong to a 14-month-old child named Rebecca Rose, whose grip is the strongest grip I have ever felt, and to a woman named Joan Pemberton, who never gave birth to me, but who is the only person on this earth I will ever call mother, and to a man named David, who never asked for the hands, who waited until I offered, and to every patient who will lie on my table in the years I have left to operate, because those are the people who earned them. And as for the people who left me, the two people who, 25 years later, decided I was worth a phone call only when one of them was dying, there is nothing in these hands for you. There never was. The little girl on the Akron bench died, the way little girls die when they are left. The woman who replaced her does not owe you what she built without you. The phone rang again today. It rang for 30 minutes, and I did exactly what I did that morning in February. I looked down at my niece. I looked at my mother. I looked at the life I chose. And I let it ring. Because the only door that stays open in my life is the one I unlock myself. And no one has the keys to that door but me. Let it ring.